All right, hello everyone. Welcome to another edition of a Codecademy live stream. My name is Alex. I'm a curriculum developer here at Codecademy. In chat, go ahead and let me know if you can see everything, if you can hear everything as we get started here. Today's lesson, and my audio is playing. Today's lesson, we're going to be doing a little bit of object-oriented programming, which is a really common style of programming and a really great way to organize your code and kind of think about programming as a whole. It kind of shapes, your entire perspective, or it's a little bit hard to not think about coding in terms of object-oriented programming once you get used to it. At least I find that I think a lot about it. Audio is broken. Other people are saying they can hear me. Hello, Oscar. Okay, great. So if you are watching on YouTube, the kind of goal of these live streams are to be able to code along actively with me. So if you're on YouTube, this first link in the description will send you to this page on Codecademy. You'll have to be logged in. If you're not logged in, go ahead and log in, and you might have to refresh the page or click on that link again. And you will get to a page that looks a lot like this. Right now, I have the final version of what we're going to be making today. These are all separate objects in JavaScript. So we'll talk about what that means for these to be objects and how we make them. But this is kind of our final goal at the end of this live stream. Yeah, another thing that I want to mention is I want this to be super interactive. So we've got a bunch of people in chat. Let me know if you have questions. Let me know if you're able to follow along. I have Sarah sitting in the room with me right now. She'll also be in chat, and so if there's a question that I miss or a question that she can answer, she might call it out to me or answer it herself in chat. Other than that, let's go ahead and get started. So I will reset my project. OK, so what you should see is just this blank blue screen. And we're going to be coding in JavaScript. So we have a JavaScript file here and an index.html file here. So this is like kind of like web development, right? Where I could write any sort of HTML in this HTML file that I wanted, and then this sketch.js file is linked to the HTML file. So really what we are doing is making an interactive website, but it's not going to be a website like you are used to because all we're going to have is this canvas that we're going to be working on. This part of JavaScript that we're using is a library called P5, which is really great for visualizations. And so one of the first things that we can do is we can draw shapes. So we can draw an ellipse onto our canvas at a certain point. And so I'm going to draw an ellipse at 100, 200, and I'm going to make it 20 by 20. So let's go ahead and just make sure that we can draw our first image onto this canvas. Cool. So ellipse takes a couple of parameters. There are 4 of them. You can play around with what these do. The first one is the x-coordinate of the ellipse, and in fact, it's the center of the ellipse. And so if I change the x-coordinate to 400, my ellipse is going to scoot way over to the right. The second parameter is the y-coordinate, and so if I change this to 50, the ellipse is going to move up. So one thing to notice right away is that 0, 0 on this coordinate system is the top left corner. So as my x-coordinate gets bigger, the ellipse moves to the right. And as my y-coordinate gets bigger, my ellipse moves down. So if I change that to 200, my ellipse moves down. If I change it to 220, it's going to move down a little bit more. So that's kind of like the basics of P5. is we can draw shapes on the screen. We're going to get into a ton of stuff with colors and moving and all of this different stuff, but that's kind of like the basics. I see R Sky Car in chat says, can you explain how to organize these projects using classes? Yeah, that's, we're going to get a lot into why we make classes, how we organize projects using classes. So that will be what a lot of this is about. We're doing this in JavaScript just because it's kind of like nice and fun to have this nice JavaScript visualization. But the real purpose of this lesson is to wrap our minds around classes and objects and why we might use them. So we'll focus a lot on that. OK, if you're curious about these other two parameters in the ellipse function, those determine the size of the circle. So this first one will make the circle longer if it gets bigger, and the other parameter will make it taller. So you can make it kind of any shape that you want. OK, cool. So one of the cool things about P5 is that this draw function happens again and again and again, and by default it happens 60 times a second. And so you can kind of animate your objects really easily, or your shapes really easily. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to create a variable for my object's y position. Let's start it at 50. As a side note, I am probably most comfortable in Python. And again, I'm really kind of focused on the conceptual understanding of a class. So I am not a super expert in JavaScript. So I might do things like forget a semicolon, as I've already done a couple of times. I might use var instead of let, because let is kind of new. So bear with me as I make some JavaScript syntax errors here and there. OK, cool. So we have this variable called y position. And let me plug in y position into my ellipse. And so this should scoot that circle up a little bit. Yeah, global variables, exactly. So it's a good point, right? So this project is going to be a little bit hacky in some areas. Like I just defined this global variable. But the point of all of this is to kind of explain why classes are necessary or why we might want to use classes. So there'll definitely be some stuff that is a little bit thrown together. Great point, Sam. If the video is blurry, you can go ahead and change settings down in here in YouTube to 720p. OK, so great. I have plugged in my variable for my y position. And now we can really see this draw loop in action. Again, the draw loop happens 60 times per second. So if I change my y position by 1 every time the draw loop happens, this is going to make it look like this ellipse is moving. So there it goes. So every single time the draw loop happens, I draw an ellipse at a certain position, and then I change the y position that it's going to draw at. And then the loop happens again. And now that ellipse is drawn at the new position, and then we update where the next one is going to be drawn. And that happens 60 times a second. You can see that the owned ellipses are still there in the background. We can make it look like there's only one ellipse by repainting the background every time the draw loop starts. So I'm going to grab this code that is painting the background a certain color. And there we go. We have this one ellipse that is moving down the screen. And really what's happening is I'm painting the background, so I'm painting over everything that we've done before. I'm drawing the ellipse. I'm updating my y position variable to say the next ellipse that I want to draw should be a little bit lower. And then I'm repainting the background, drawing the ellipse, updating the position, and doing that again and again and again. OK, cool. Any questions about kind of basic P5 shapes or how this draw loop works? Again, this doesn't really have anything to do with object-oriented programming yet, but we're going to need it in order to make a really cool visualization using objects. think we are good, so we can move on. Okay, again, I'm going to show the final results again really quickly. So I'm going to copy my code that I have already. I'm going to show you guys my final results in case you tuned in late. So this is what we're going to be aiming for. And so these are a bunch of objects that are falling down the screen. And one thing that you might notice is that when an object hits the bottom of the screen, it pops back up to the top. So that big green one just popped up there, right? This purple one, keep an eye on it. There it is, back at the top. So let me go back to what we had before. So how do you move the ellipse? Yeah, that's a good question in chat. Again, the ellipse is really kind of moving because we are updating this y position variable every time through the draw loop to increase by 1 every time. If we made it increase by 5 every time, it would make it look like the ellipse is moving faster. So this number here is kind of the speed of our ball that is falling. Okay, cool. So we just saw that when one of these raindrops hit the bottom of the screen, it reappeared at the top. So let's write in that logic. And again, this isn't really object-oriented programming yet, but it's kind of a piece of functionality that we're going to want to build into our objects. So this is going to be, to do this, we're going to use an if statement or a conditional statement. So I'm going to go ahead and say, if my y position is greater than or equal to 500, and 500 is the bottom of my canvas. I defined the size of my canvas here. If my y position is greater than or equal to 500, what do you think should happen? Well, we want the ellipse to move back up to the top, so I could reset y position to be equal to 0. So as soon as the ellipse gets to the bottom of the screen, I'm going to say, nope, you're not at the bottom anymore, you're all the way at the top. And so let's see if that works. It's moving slowly. I probably could have increased the speed. Nice. It does work. Let's increase the speed a little bit. Cool. Okay. So we kind of have one object that you saw in the final result, and we haven't put this into a class or made this an object-oriented program yet. Before we do that, let's make 100 ellipses, and let's create them with random x positions. Let's have them all move at random speeds. And so in order to do this, we're going to use an array. And again, if you're not super familiar with arrays, that's okay. The point of this lesson isn't to really teach you how to use arrays or what arrays are. So this might be, so don't worry too much if you haven't seen this syntax before. Yeah, nice, Cheryl. You said set it to 1. So I'm going to create 3 lists. And okay, so if we want 100 of these balls that are falling, we want 100 x positions, 100 y positions, and 100 different speeds, right? One of these, one per ball, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give them I'm going to make all of those variables random to begin with. And so I'm going to write a for loop. Again, don't worry too much if you aren't really familiar with for loops. So I'm going to write a for loop that happens 100 times. I hope I've done that right. And what am I going to do 100 times? I'm going to add a random value into each of these lists. So let's put something into the y position list. Push. So I'm going to take my y position list. I'm going to push something into it, meaning adding it into this list. And the thing that I'm going to add to it is a random number. So I will explain this line of code in a second. And actually, I will also do this for the X list and Y list. While I do this, think about what this value that I'm pushing into these lists, what this is. Try to take a guess at what math.random times 500, what that could possibly be doing. Any thoughts on what these 3 lines of code are doing? So math.random gives you a random number between 0 and 1. Do we have an audio issue? Ooh, an error. Interesting. Can you try to refresh? Do you guys still see me, or? Okay, cool. So math.random gives you a random number between 0 and 1, a decimal, right? So it might be 0.2, it might be 0.5. We're then going to take that random number and multiply it by 500. So that kind of increases the range which these numbers could be. It starts where it's some number between 0 and 1, and then we multiply it by 500, so now we have a number between 0 and 500. Please show the HTML. Yeah, I can show the HTML. It's really basic. All that's going on in the HTML is I am including the P5 library, and P5 is the thing that lets us draw ellipses and change the color, and P5 is the thing that lets us basically interact with the canvas in the way that we're doing. So all that's going on in the HTML is I'm including the source code for P5, and then I'm also including this sketch.js file that I'm writing. And like I said before, this is like a normal HTML file, so I could add whatever I wanted here. I could do, this is my object-oriented visualization. All right, I could put that in a div, and then look at that. It's there on my HTML. So this is like any kind of HTML that you might already be familiar with, but we're just really focusing on the JavaScript portion of it, and specifically the stuff that we can do in P5. Shouldn't we use a round method here? Yeah, that's a good point. So math.random gives you a random decimal, and then we multiply it by 500, and so that is also a random decimal. And eventually what we're going to be using these numbers and these lists for are to draw ellipses in certain locations. And so we might want to round those to a whole number, like 400, but this works fine. I could have said ellipse at 400.5, and that would have put it on the screen just the same. So yeah, we might want to round random numbers, but it's not a huge deal if we don't. Good question, though. Okay, cool. So we have our 3 lists. Why don't I use semicolon? That is a great question. I don't use semicolon because I don't usually program in JavaScript, and I am a forgetful person. But you should use semicolons because that is proper style in JavaScript. So good call. Yeah, Oscar, this video will be posted right away, right as it ends. So if you jumped in late or if you can't catch the end of it, stick around or check our YouTube channel afterwards, and this video should be up there. Okay, so what do we do with these random numbers? Actually, before I even use them, let me make sure that these random numbers are working correctly. So I'm going to open up the JavaScript console. I usually do that I use Chrome, and so I can come in here and say View, Developer, JavaScript console. Ooh, and that really kind of screwed up my window here. Let me fix this. So I pulled up the JavaScript console. If you've never pulled up the JavaScript console before, it's a really good way to kind of get a sense of what variables your program thinks it's working with, the value of those variables. It's where you can log things to the console to see what they look like. So I'm going to log one of these values. So let me log ypause list. And so let me do that. When I run this, now you can see in the console, this big list of numbers was logged, and it has 100 things in it, which is great. That's what I wanted. And then, like we said, yeah, they're all decimals. And it sure looks like it's between 0 and 500. So it looks like we've done that correctly. I'm going to keep the console up here just so we can kind of come back and look at it later if we need to. But that's good to know that this is currently working. OK, cool. So now that we have these lists of numbers, let's use them to draw a bunch of ellipses. So this is going to look really similar to what we have already, except for instead of drawing one ellipse, we're going to use another for loop to draw 100 of them. So I'm going to write another for loop that happens 100 times. And I'm going to put all of this code that's already in here inside that for loop, because this is the code that drew an ellipse that fell, and when it reached the bottom, it jumped back to the top. Couldn't you use modulo, so ypause modulo 500 instead of the if stuff? Yeah, that's a great point. That's another really good way to do that, where if you use modulo, so we could do ypause equals ypause modulo 500. That would make sure that ypause is always a value between 0 and 100. That's another great way to do that. Yeah, great way to refactor your code. OK, cool. So we have this for loop. And now what we want to do is we want to use these lists that we created already. So I want to draw an ellipse at xpause list index I. And its y position should be ypause list at index I. Again, don't worry too much if this indexing isn't really, if you haven't seen this before. All we're doing is we're looping through the list, and for every item in the list, we're grabbing that item and drawing an ellipse at that place in the list. So for example, the first thing in xpause list might be this 327. So the first time we go through the for loop, it's going to use 327. The next time we go through the for loop, it's going to use 357 as the x position, and so on and so on. Cool. So let's say everywhere that this happens, so we're going to update ypause list by not 5, but by speed list of I. We're going to say if ypause list of I is greater than 500, we are going to reset ypause list of I, and I want that to be ypause list. So if we run this right now, ooh, yeah, those are going super fast, which Sarah pointed out is because we are allowing the speed to be a really huge number. So I'm not going to allow it to be between 0 and 500. I'm going to allow it to be between 0 and 10. Cool. Any questions so far? I'm very happy to take questions about this I indexing or what's going on in these for loops if you want to talk about it. So if you've got any questions, go ahead and post them in chat. I'm going to add another list up here. I'm going to add, and I've been saying list a lot. Are they called arrays in JavaScript? What are they, Sarah? Are they arrays? They are indeed arrays. Again, I'm more of a Python person. In Python, they are called lists. Can you make it go slow and fast at the same time? Interesting. What do you mean by that? Slow and fast at the same time. You can definitely make, so some of these are moving slower than others. And that's because we are using different speeds we are updating the y position by a different speed each time. What is push? Great question. Push is the thing that, it's the function that will add something to an array. So I start with these arrays being empty, and I do something 100 times, right? That's what this for loop is doing. And the thing that I do 100 times is I push a number into the array. And so at the end of this for loop, I now have arrays that have 100 things in them. Slow on one side, fast on the opposite end. Ah, interesting. Yeah, so you could potentially edit. So this line of code, this changes the ball's position, right? This line 25 changes the ball's position. And right now we are doing that just based on the speed list. We could do that based on anything that we want, right? So we could do it based on xpos list of I. And this is going to make it so the ones on the far right, which have an x position of 500, move at speed 500. So they're going to be going really, really, really fast. Yeah, so they're going so fast that it looks basically like gibberish. But the ones further to the left are a little bit better. We can do xpos list divided by 20. That's kind of cool. I will keep it like that. Matt says, I'm seeing one that does not move at all. Why? That's a good question, Matt. The things that we're putting in this speed list are numbers between 0 and 10. And so some of those will have a speed of 0, and so those won't move at all. If we wanted everything to move at least a little bit, we could add +1 to all of these. And so now our numbers go from 1 to 11 rather than 0 to 10. I really like this, this addition of slow on the left and fast on the right. That's very cool. OK. So we've reached the point where basically this looks really similar to that final version of my project that I had before, which again, I will pull that up in case you have not seen it. So I just copied all the code that we've done. Let me make sure that I don't lose it. OK, great. Let me pull up the final save point. So this is the final version of the code that we want. And so we basically have this already. I mean, we haven't done the size thing really. We haven't done the colors. But we have 100 balls that are falling and reappearing when they reach the top. And so this is where we can really start to learn about object-oriented programming. And so let me bring back the code that we just had. OK, so the idea behind object-oriented programming is that it would be really nice if I could kind of define what one of these balls or one of these raindrops is. And right now we've done that in 3 separate locations, right? We've said the first ball that is dropping is the first number, the information about that ball is contained in the first number in this y position list, the first number in the x position list, and the first number in this speed list. The second ball is the second number in each one of these lists, right? So we kind of have all of these information about each one of these balls separated into 3 different variables. And the idea behind object-oriented programming is that we want to create our own structure that will keep all of this stuff together. So rather than having these 3 lists, I can just have a list of raindrops or balls. And each one of those balls will know this is my x position, this is my y position, this is my speed. The other curriculum developer in the room, Sarah, had this really good metaphor of, in life, you think about objects as the properties that they contain about themselves, right? So I have a closet full of shirts. And in fact, I don't, because I live in a small Brooklyn apartment. I don't have a closet. However, I can show the bottom of the code. However, when I think about the shirts that are in my closet, I don't think about 3 lists of these are their colors, and these are whether they're buttoned or not, and these are whether they're short sleeves or not. I think about I have one shirt that is plaid and button down and is blue and white. I have one shirt that is red and all of these other properties about it. when I think about objects in the real world, I think about the objects and the properties associated with them. I don't think about lists of properties on their own, like what we have here. Maybe that's a bizarre metaphor, but I think that it was a good one. So what we want to do is we want to write some code that will, where all of the data about a single ball will be contained. And so we do this by writing a class. And so the class is kind of the template of, if I were to make a raindrop, what are the things about a raindrop that I want it to know about? So I'm going to write this class raindrop. If you have any questions about like the overall idea of this, please ask in chat. Because again, this is like more of a conceptual lesson than anything else. The syntax doesn't really, I want you to be able to program this and code this, but I'm more interested in like developing this understanding of what is a class, what is an object, how can we think about the world in a way that we can write code that makes sense. Alice, can you post this code somewhere? I can read slowly. I have an error somewhere in mine which I can't find. Absolutely. In fact, this was something I was playing around with earlier. Let me go ahead and save this and use some of my special Codecademy access. Alice, if you want this exact code that I have, I think if you press this reset project button right now, I think you might be able to get my exact code right now. I hope that works. It might not. I didn't test that before, but I think that it should work. So you can try that. If not, I can make sure to post this code afterwards. OK, cool. So let me write this class raindrop. OK, and so the first thing that we want to do when making a class is saying, when I create a raindrop, what nouns or adjectives about this raindrop do I want it to know about? And these are usually called instance variables, and those are set in the constructor. And so for us, a raindrop has an x position, it has a y position, and it has a speed. And eventually we'll do like color and size, and we'll do other things. So these are the instance variables, right? I usually think about these as these are the nouns and adjectives about the class that you're making. Cool. And the way that you declare instance variables in JavaScript is you use this dot syntax. I'll talk a little bit about why we use this dot. But for now, we can just say, OK, these are the 3 variables that a raindrop knows about. And when I create a raindrop, when I make a new raindrop, refreshing made everything go away. LMAO. You are correct. That makes a lot of sense. Let me see. Is there an easy way to fix that? Should I reset the initial workspace? The initial save point, but that doesn't do anything. No, right, because it didn't, and so reset it to the initial save point. OK, let me, I will reset the initial save point. Yeah, let me do that. Let me. OK, BD, BD, BD. I think now if you press that, yeah, that's actually a good solution as well. Sarah, I'm going to send you this code. Could you put it somewhere? Yeah. Sarah. have it now. Great. OK, so hopefully that works. I'm also getting Sarah to paste this code somewhere accessible. OK. Will the stream be saved on the channel? Yep, the streams always go up on the channel as soon as they're done. So if you miss the start of it, or if you can't save for the whole thing, you can check it out later. OK, cool. So we were making this constructor. So we have our 3 variables that a raindrop knows about. And when we construct a new raindrop, we want them to have random values. So let me grab these 3 things. And right, we eventually want to do color and size. And I'm actually going to now get rid of this thing that we were using when we had our 3 separate lists, because we don't want that anymore. OK, cool. So now, because I have this class, and again, the idea behind a class is that it is the template for how do I make a raindrop. Now that I have this class, I can actually make a raindrop. I can say, I can make this variable named my first raindrop equals, I think in JavaScript you use new syntax. Yeah. So I'm saying my first raindrop is a new raindrop. Great. And now let me console.log my first raindrop. Let me run that again. Ooh, internal error. Great. Did I totally botch this by resetting the workspace? OK, no, I didn't. You might have to refresh if you get that internal error. I don't see the code in. TPS, I'm not sure if I know what you're talking about. If you could be a little bit more, or if you could explain the error that you're seeing or what's happening. OK, but for now, what I'm doing is I'm making a raindrop and I'm logging it. And over here, I can see, hey, look, I logged this raindrop. And this raindrop has a speed, it has an X position, and it has a Y position. And those things were set when I created the raindrop. Right? When I say new raindrop, the constructor gets called. And so it sets the position and speed to random values. If I wanted the speed to all be the same, I could do something like this. And now this raindrop that just got created has speed 3. I don't see the code on the site. Yeah, go ahead and refresh the page, or you can click on that link that Sarah posted and get some of the code from a little bit ago. OK, cool. So we just made our first raindrop. Let's make 100 raindrops. So let's now say raindrop list. And sure, raindrop list is an empty list. Oh yeah, Jim Johnson, that might be a problem. Your editor might look like this. You can click on that middle panel to see it. If it looks like that, click on the middle panel. OK. Cool. So right, we were making a list of raindrops. So again, I'm going to use a for loop to do this. So var I equals 0. I'm going to create 100 of them. And now what I'm going to do in the for loop is I am going to take my raindrop list. And I'm going to push into it a new raindrop. And now let me log my raindrop list. Cool. there's my list of 100 raindrops. And I can open this up and I can look at each one, and they all have a random x position and a y position and a random, not a random speed. The speed is 3 right now. Let me change that back to somewhere between 1 and 11. Okay, awesome. So now we've kind of done this idea of, before we had these separate lists that each contained a different aspect of a raindrop, right? A different element, a different adjective or noun about that raindrop. And they used to be separate. And now what we've done is we've combined them into this one object called a raindrop, which is really great. Like, our code is a lot more organized now. And as we start to develop bigger projects, it'll be a lot easier to keep track of, this is a raindrop and it has a x position. Okay, cool. So now what we want to do is we want to be able to display them. So the other thing that classes have is classes can have specific methods associated with them. And I always describe these as like the verbs of your object, right? So right now we have a raindrop, and the raindrop has adjectives and nouns, and those are our instance variables. Those are its position, its speed, its color, all of the adjectives and nouns, descriptive things about this raindrop. And now we want to write code that is about what can this raindrop do, right? It's a verb. And one thing that a raindrop can do is display itself, right? We want a raindrop to show up over here on our canvas. So I'm going to write this display function. And what the display function does is really similar to what we had before, is display draws an ellipse at this dot x position, so the raindrop's x position. It draws its at its y position, and for now, let's draw it at 10 by 10. So I just added some functionality to our class, right? And these are called methods, and again, think of it as a verb that this thing could use. And so now I can use that, right? I have my list of 100 raindrops. And now down here, instead of calling ellipse, and instead of adding all the functionality down here, I can say raindrop list of I. So every single raindrop, I want them to display. So before I run this, do you think that the raindrops will be moving? And why or why not? Oh, we have someone new. Welcome. Yeah, so if you're brand new to this, this is a lesson that there's a lot of different programming topics in here, like for loops and arrays, and a lot of kind of syntax that might look really scary. And I want to assure you that the idea behind this is not, of this specific live stream, is not to really teach those for loops and arrays and stuff. It's about this concept of object-oriented programming and organizing your code in this way where we're making a raindrop that has things about itself and that can do things. Repeat the question. Do you think that the raindrops will A, show up on the screen, and B, move? And C, I guess, if they move, do you think that they will jump back up to the top of the screen when they reach the bottom? How do you get rid of the internal error that I got earlier? I refreshed my page, which I hope will not completely destroy your code. It won't move because you haven't added movement to class. That's exactly right? The only thing that the class knows how to do is this display function, and the only thing that happens in the display function is drawing an ellipse. So if I run this code, I got an error. Let's see what it is. I think I got an error. Let me clear my console. Run the code again. Let's see. I've not made the call to do that yet. Yeah, Matt Olson, that is correct. Where is... Okay, I have a syntax error somewhere. I have an unexpected token. So I've missed a curly brace or something, and it's on line 36. I'm guessing I screwed up my brackets here. Yeah, I did. Nice. Ellipse, is this a JavaScript function or a P5 function? That's a P5 function, right? And actually, if you want to look at more P5 functions, first of all, there are a ton of really awesome resources to learn about P5. I think it's the best tool for beginning programming because it's super fun. It's very visual. You should look up Dan Schiffman's YouTube series. He has this YouTube series called the Coding Train. It is really, really awesome. Sarah also just posted all of the P5 there are some P5 resources in the chat. Okay, cool. So I ran my code after fixing that little bug about having an extra curly bracket. And there are all of my dots. So they're not moving. So let's write another function of a raindrop class called move, or we could call it fall, right? Again, it's a verb that a raindrop can do. A raindrop can move, or it can fall, or it can do whatever. And this time I think I will use, I think it was, I forget who suggested the other implementation of making it jump back up to the top. I think maybe BD. But I will say a raindrop moves by increasing its y position by its speed. And again, we're in this class, so don't forget to use this dot. This dot means I want this raindrop's y position to move by this raindrop's speed, not some other raindrop that exists in the world. I want my raindrop's y position to move by my speed. Am I Schiffman's younger brother? I am not, but we wear similar clothing. Okay, cool. So let's call this let's run this before doing the thing where it gets set back up to the top. So every raindrop is going to display itself, and then every raindrop is also then going to move. And they are all going to zoom off the screen and never appear again. I found this page really helpful too, javascript.info. I don't know what that is. I hope it's not spam. Okay, cool. So all of our raindrops are falling. Let's write the little bit of logic that will get them to reappear at the top. The nice little suggestion is that we could use modulo to do this. So we can say this dot y pause modulo equals equals this dot y pause modulo 500. Nice. And so there they all are. They're all falling. They're all reappearing back at the top. Let's add some color and also size. And again, if you have questions about these functions, go ahead and ask them now. Ooh, and let's also get back to that point where the ones on the right were falling faster than the ones on the left. We did that by saying, don't increase it by its speed, increase it by its x position, which will make the ones on the right go really, really fast. So x position divided by, let's say, 50. That's cool. I like that quite a bit. Should probably be mod 500 plus ellipse size. Yeah, so there's like a little bit of weirdness with how big the ellipse is. Right now, everything is happening from the center of the ellipse, which I think that is, fine. Sorting list by speed could also work. That would also be a great idea. So sorting the list by speed would, yeah, that would make more sense, right? This is kind of a weird line of code where we're modifying the y position based on its x position, but it's kind of a demonstration of you can use these for anything. Yeah. Now you made snowflakes. Yeah, that's a good point. We can also say, we can also change how these things are drawn, right? Right now they're just ellipses. We can like throw a rectangle on top of them, right? You can do a ton of stuff to make these appear differently. Please repeat the purpose of the raindrop class. Yeah, that's an awesome question. That's really kind of like the whole point of this exercise, is that we've made this class where all of our information about a single raindrop is contained in one place. And so there are really two big things that a class, or big pieces of information that a class has. It has all of the nouns and adjectives associated with that thing, and those are our instance variables. And so right now that's a raindrop's x position, its y position, and its speed. And we're about to do this dot size. We're about to do size, right? That's an adjective associated with a raindrop. And so those are all in the same kind of data structure, the same place. The other thing that a class can do is you can add functionality to it. So these are the verbs. What can a raindrop do? It can show itself on the screen. That's display. And it can move, right? Or it can fall, or we could have named this whatever we wanted. You can think about other things that raindrops do. Maybe you want like a splatter function, and when it gets to the bottom, it turns into something else. Once we're done with this exercise, we'll talk a little bit about conceptually other classes that we could make. So let me quickly add size. So I'm going to make the size a random number between, let's say, 1 and 30. And so where do I use size? I use size in the verb to display, right? In the function display. So instead of being 10 by 10, I'm going to use this dot size. So now these should all have different sizes. That's pretty cool. And then finally, let's add some color. I haven't really talked about how to do color yet in P5. So I'll go through this kind of quickly. Alice, I see your question. I will answer it in a second. Let me do color, and there's actually going to be 3 different instance variables or adjectives about this. It's going to be how much red does this raindrop have? It's going to be how much green does this raindrop have? And how much blue does this raindrop have? And these are going to be numbers between 1 and 2, or 0 and 255. And if you know anything about like RGB values or hex codes or anything, this might look a little bit familiar to you. If not, don't worry about this too much. This is basically how you do color in P5, which is a really cool topic, and you could go, you could learn a lot about this. But for now, all we're going to do is we're going to say, before we draw the ellipse, we're going to fill it with its red value, its green value, and its blue value. And there we go. Each ellipse has its own red, green, and blue values, and those 3 values are used together to color in the ellipse. And you can imagine if this wasn't object-oriented, we would have needed these big lists for like red list, right? We would have needed something like this, green list, right? We would have needed all of these giant lists. And instead what we do, because we are making this a class, we're saying one single raindrop has a red value, it has a green value, it has a blue value, and then those are used within the raindrops, and then we happen to make 100 raindrops. Can you change attributes from where you call the class, i.e. new raindrop x? Yeah, so that's a great question. We can say, if we want to always make the raindrops appear at the x position 250, we could say the constructor takes some input x value, and rather than the x position being this random number, we're going to make it be input x value. And now these raindrops should all be right in the middle of the screen. So that's a really good question, Jim, about adding parameters to this constructor. And you can certainly do that. we just happen, because we want this to be like random and fun and them all over the place, we're just making everything random, which means that we don't really need to pass any constructors in here. The parameters appear in order then. Yes, exactly. So they appear however you define them in here. So if I pass in a 250 and then a 100, and then I have two parameters up here of param1 and param2, parameter 1 will be 250, parameter 2 will be 100, and then I can use them however I want in the constructor. So I could set the speed equal to param2, or I could set the blue equal to param1. So these will all now be moving at the same speed, and they'll all have the same blue value. OK, cool. If you have any other questions about this specific project, go ahead and ask them. To finish this up, I wanted to kind of like talk about this idea behind object-oriented programming in general. And I think a good way to do that is to think about pieces of software that you've seen before or that you've used before that have objects, and thinking about what the nouns and verbs or nouns and adjectives associated with those objects are. So what would those instance variables be, and then what can those objects do, meaning what functions do they have? And the one that I've used in the past is let's pull up an image of a Mario game. All right. So I think like a useful exercise now that we kind of have this idea of objects and classes are used to store data all in the same place, is let's think about what would the instance variables of Mario be? And go ahead and think about that in the chat, right? What are the nouns and adjectives associated with Mario? And there'll be some similar ones to ones that we coded today for these raindrops, and there'll probably be some different ones. So go ahead and in chat, give me some instance variables for Mario, or really for any of these things, or if there's a different object that you're thinking of. Let's try to think about how we would create some of these objects if we were going to try to start writing Mario. Any ideas? What are nouns and adjectives associated with Mario? Or if you want to do the second part of a class, what are the functions or methods that Mario can do? Like what are the verbs that he has access to? I'll wait a little bit to see if anyone in chat has any ideas about if we were to write a Mario class, what would our instance variables be, and what would our functions be or methods be? I've never played Mario. What does he do? Mario walks around. He can jump. We also don't have to do Mario, right? We can think about, actually, another good idea is, practically, like, we can think about objects in the real world as classes and objects. And so maybe think about, a deck of cards or some dice. What properties are associated with a single die or several dice? Cats, yeah, Mariel, that's a good one, right? Cats. There are lots of variables associated with, or lots of like nouns and adjectives associated with cats. So those are the instance variables, and lots of verbs, things that cats can do. Cool, yeah, a fireball variable, right? So going back to the Mario example, and we can make this brief because some people have not played Mario, right? Mario has an X position. He has a Y position. He has, am I in fireball mode, right? Can I throw fireballs? He has, am I dead or not? He has, have I jumped already, right? Because you can only jump once before touching the ground again. All of these variables are things about Mario. And then he has things that he can do. He can jump. And so when he jumps, maybe that variable associated with have I jumped already before touching the ground, maybe that flips to false. You'd have to, again, write movement. Right, more methods that Mario has, he can walk right, he can run right, he can walk left, he can run left, he can crouch, he can do all sorts of things, right? So those would be, if we were to make a Mario class, those would be the functions, and all of the nouns and adjectives, the things about Mario, would be the instance variables. And then in theory, you can make 100 Marios, right? And each one will have this one's position is this one has fire flower mode, this one is running left, this one is running right, right? You can make 100 different copies of this one object that all have their own information about them. The dice example, which I will do very briefly, a die has a certain number of sides. So I could, if I were to write a die class or dice class, I might have a constructor that has this dot sides, right? Most dice are 6-sided, but some are not. Dice have this dot face up, right? That's an important thing. What's the current top side of the die? Maybe it starts at 1 by default. And then a thing dice can do is I can roll my own dice, right? And that would probably change the this dot face up variable. If I'm doing something in like P5, I would probably want the dice to be able to display itself, right? This would like draw a rectangle and a certain number of circles based on this dot face up. Meaning, if the current thing that's face up is a 6, I would want to draw a rectangle with 6 dots on it. If it's a 3, I'd want to draw a rectangle with 3 dots on it. Yeah, Jim, great question about what does this dot mean? Is it like var or let? And actually, Sarah, here's a question for you. Should these instance variables, should I do let this dot x position, or is that not proper syntax? So I don't think you need to do, when you're making these instance variables, and again, this is specific to JavaScript, the syntax is going to be different depending on the language that you're using. You might have to say let, but this idea of this dot is present in pretty much any language that is using object-oriented programming. And what this dot means is that you are defining the variable for every raindrop, right? So each one of these raindrops has an x position and a y position and a speed. And when I use these instance variables in functions like display or move, the instance variable that I want to use is this raindrop's position or this raindrop speed. I don't want to use any of the other raindrops that might exist in the world. I want to use this single one. Yeah, that's a really great question, Jim, and I hope I explained it well. Let's see. What's my favorite IDE? I use, my text editor is Atom. I think it's okay. I don't have strong feelings about it anyway. BD, I stuck with Vim because I don't know how to exit it. It's very true. Okay, cool. I think that we have reached the end of this live stream. When or why would you want to create your own library for classes instead of using an existing one? That's a complicated question and really depends on what that existing library does. Yeah, right. It's entirely possible that you are trying to do something that has never been made. That's like what is super empowering about coding is that if it doesn't exist, then you can just kind of make it yourself, and it can be a thing that exists in the world, and then other people can use it, and it's a great collaborative process. Instead of P5, for example. Interesting. So like, when would you want to make your own. Yeah, I think one answer is that if you're not satisfied with the functionality of P5, right? If you find P5 really frustrating in certain ways, and you're like, hey, I think I have a better way of drawing shapes to the screen or a more intuitive way, then you can start to get your hands dirty writing your own library. Yeah, more control maybe. Yeah, and I mean, just depends on what you want to do with it, right? There are lots of different. It's kind of the same thing with programming languages in general, right? Where I like Python because the things that I do with Python are usually like data science-y related, and Python has a bunch of libraries that I know well and that I find less cumbersome or less burdensome to use. And so I could do all of this data science stuff in JavaScript, and there are lots of cool libraries that will let you do that. But for the stuff that I am working with, I like the Python things. Okay, so this is what I want you to do. If you made it to the end of this video, thank you very much. I am, oh shoot, I did not make a feedback form. Okay, I will post a feedback form in the description of this YouTube video in like 10 minutes. I understand that that is probably an impossible ask for someone to come back to a YouTube page 10 minutes after a live stream has ended. But if you watch this, I would very much appreciate you to fill out a feedback form. Yeah, Sarah, if you could put the code on Replit right now. Yeah, let me. Why don't you just do the final save point? Yeah. So one, I will post a feedback form on the YouTube description. It would be great if you could fill that out. Two, I would love to see you take this idea of falling raindrops and experiment with it on your own. Like this idea of having the ones on the left moving slowly and the ones on the right moving quickly is awesome, and it makes a really cool result. I would love to see you guys, or you all, experiment with this on your own. And if you do something, send it to us. Tweet at Codecademy, comment in the YouTube section. And in fact, what I will do is, if you send some stuff in and they're really cool, I will put screenshots of your projects and give you credit in the objective over here. And that goes for people who are watching this well after the fact too. So people who are not watching this live, if you make it all the way to the end, I'd love to see what you do. Can I post the feedback form in chat instead? Yes, I can. You know what? I will, because I am about to shut down the live stream and make this feedback form anyways, I might as well just do that in a separate window and keep the chat open so you guys can ask questions. So I'm going to be making a feedback form over here. Feedback form in Slack maybe. Yeah, so I will post the feedback form, but the issue is that the feedback form does not currently exist. When can I start applying to jobs? So we actually had a live stream about job interviews and whiteboarding and things like that. You can find that on our YouTube page. There's also ways to find it on Codecademy itself. Shoot, I don't know if I will be able to quickly, you know what, I will from here. Again, I'm just going to make this form right now. So if you want to leave, there is going to be pretty much no more coding that is happening. But I'm happy to answer questions as I make this thing. How can I know that I'm ready for applying? That is a really great question. How can I know that I'm ready for applying for jobs? I think it helps to kind of practice these interview questions. Yeah, it really depends. I can scroll to the bottom of my code. Yeah, I think having a little bit of a portfolio might help. Like if you have 2 or 3 projects that you can show off, that might really help. Okay, cool. I have this form ready. Let me get posted in the chat. Mac is too expensive. That is very true. Okay, so there's the feedback form. I will also post it in the description of the YouTube video if you want to fill it out later. Cool. Okay, I think I'm going to stop the stream. We're going to continue streaming every Thursday at 1:30. So if you don't get an email, or if you don't see a notification on Codecademy, or if you don't see a tweet, or any of these ways that you might have found the stream, hopefully you can just find it through YouTube. This has been super fun. I hope you like this project. I hope you have a better understanding of what object-oriented programming is and why you might want to use it. And we'll see you next time. Thanks, everyone.